A billionaire went to the hospital on business and came across Triplets saying, "Our mom is dying, and they won't treat her because we have no money." When they showed him her photo, he was shocked. Reed Mercer hated hospitals. The smell of disinfectant, the harsh lighting that seemed to drain the color out of everything, the muffled sounds of voices and machines, all of it made him want to turn around and run. But today, he had no choice. As the CEO of Mercer Health Systems, it was his duty to personally present the new hospital management software his company had developed. "Fifth floor car," he muttered to himself as he stepped into the empty elevator. That was where the boardroom was located. When the doors opened, Reed checked his watch. He still had 20 minutes before the meeting, enough time to review his slides one last time and mentally prepare. If everything went well, the hospital would sign a 5-year contract to implement his system, opening the door to other hospitals in the region. That was when he felt a tug on the hem of his jacket. He looked down, and for a moment thought he was seeing triple. 3 identical little girls, with curly brown hair and wide eyes, stared up at him with a mix of desperation and hope. None of them could be more than 5 years old. They were wearing clothes far too thin for the cold outside, faded t-shirts and jeans that looked like they'd seen better days. "Mister," said one of them, the one clutching his jacket, "can you help us?" Reed glanced around, looking for a responsible adult. The hallway was nearly empty, except for a nurse typing something into a computer too far away to notice what was happening. "Where are your parents?" he asked, crouching down to their eye level. The middle girl took a step forward. She had a small scratch on her cheek and seemed the most determined of the 3. "Our mom is dying," she said, her voice trembling but not breaking, "and they won't treat her because we don't have any money." Reed frowned. "What do you mean they won't treat her?" "They said they need a card," explained the third girl, the smallest by a few inches. "But we don't have one." "A health insurance card," Reed translated. "Are you here alone?" The 3 nodded in unison. "How did you get to the hospital?" "The ambulance brought Mom," said the first girl. "We came along. And where is she now?" "Downstairs," the middle one pointed. "They left her on a gurney in the hallway. They said they can't do anything without that card." Reed felt heat rising up his neck. He knew the health system was flawed, but to deny urgent care to a severely injured woman right in front of her young children, that was more than a system problem. It was cruelty. "Can you take me to her?" The 3 nodded again, and the middle girl held out her hand to him. Reed took it, surprising himself. He wasn't the type to hold hands with strangers' children, but something in their gaze, a blend of desperation and determination, moved him in a way he couldn't explain. In the elevator, the girls introduced themselves. "I'm Maisie," said the one who had spoken first. "I'm June," said the middle one, still holding his hand. "And I'm Ren," added the smallest. "And I'm Reed," he replied, trying to smile to reassure them. When they reached the emergency department, Reed understood the gravity of the situation. The place was packed, with people sitting in uncomfortable chairs, some moaning in pain, others staring blankly at nothing. And as the girls had described, there were stretchers in the corridors. "Over there," June pointed, letting go of his hand and running. Reed followed in with Maisie and Ren close behind. They stopped in front of a gurney where a young woman lay unconscious. Her face was pale, with a cut on her forehead and several scrapes. One of her arms had a makeshift bandage, and she wore one of those hospital gowns that make anyone look sicker than they are. "Mom," Ren called, her voice so soft Reed could barely hear it. She touched the woman's hand, which didn't move. June turned to Reed, eyes brimming with tears. "See? They're not doing anything." Reed looked around, spotted the reception desk, and walked over, determined. The 3 girls followed him like ducklings behind their mother. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with deep circles under her eyes. "That patient," he pointed to the gurney, "needs urgent care." The woman didn't even look up. "Everyone here needs urgent care, sir. We're following triage priority." "She's unconscious and has 3 little girls," Reed insisted, his tone growing firmer. "What happened to her?" Finally, the receptionist looked at him, then at the girls. Her expression softened slightly. "Hit and run. The driver fled. She was crossing the street with the kids when she was struck. The woman lowered her voice. But without health insurance, we can only provide basic emergency care, which was done. For any additional treatment, we need a payment guarantee. Reed felt his blood boil. So you're just going to leave her there, on that gurney, bleeding? Sir, I don't make the rules, the receptionist said wearily. If you want to complain, talk to the hospital administration. Reed was about to do exactly that when he felt another tug on his jacket. It was Wren. Mister, look, she held out her hand, showing a small golden pendant. Mom always keeps this. She said it's really valuable. Can it pay the hospital? Reed took the pendant. It was a simple oval locket, the kind that opens to hold photos. When he opened it, his heart stopped. There, preserved despite the passing years, was a picture he knew all too well. A young woman smiled at the camera, the same bright eyes as the girls, the same happiness he thought he'd never see again. Sloane Archer. The world around Reed seemed to freeze. That unconscious woman on the gurney was Sloane, the same Sloane who had disappeared from his life 8 years ago, without a trace or an explanation. He looked at the girls, really looked, and saw what he should have noticed immediately. The eyes, the shape of their faces, the way June tilted her chin, exactly like Sloane did when she was determined, 5 years old. The girls were 5, which meant, "Do you know our mum?" asked Maisie, confused by his reaction. Reed closed the locket and handed it back to Wren, unable to speak for a few seconds. When he finally found his voice, it sounded strange even to his own ears. "Yes," he said. "I knew your mother. A long time ago." He turned to the receptionist, who was watching the scene with curiosity. "I want to speak to the attending physician." Something in his tone made the woman obey without question. 10 minutes later, Reed was in a room with a tired-looking doctor who explained Sloane's situation. Head trauma, 3 broken ribs, possible internal bleeding. We need to run tests, a CT scan, probably surgery. "Do everything necessary," said Reed. "I'll pay for it all." The doctor looked relieved. "We'll need an initial deposit and your information for the rest." "That's not a problem." Reed handed over his premium credit card and ID. "I want her in the best room available with top priority care." As the doctor left to make arrangements, Reed returned to the girls, who were waiting beside Sloane's gurney. They looked at him with a mix of hope and distrust. "Your mum is going to get all the treatment she needs now," he said, crouching again. "They'll take very good care of her." "Really?" June asked, her eyes shining. "Really," Reed confirmed. "And you don't have to worry about a thing." As if to confirm his words, a medical team approached and began moving Sloane's gurney. A nurse smiled at the girls. "We're taking your mum for some tests, okay? She'll be fine." The 3 watched anxiously as Sloane was wheeled further into the hospital. "What now?" asked Maisie, her small voice nearly lost in the noise of the ER. Reed realized he hadn't thought that far ahead. What would happen to the girls while Sloane was in the hospital? Were there grandparents, a father, anyone to take care of them? "Do you have any other grown-ups you can call? A dad, grandparents, uncles?" The 3 shook their heads. "No. It's just us and Mom," June explained. "Grandma lives too far away." Reed hesitated. The alternative was to call social services, which would likely split the girls up and place them in temporary foster homes. The thought made his stomach churn. "It's okay," Wren piped up, surprising him. "We know how to take care of ourselves. We can wait here till Mum gets better." The idea of 3 5-year-olds taking care of themselves in a hospital for days, maybe weeks, was absurd. Before he could think twice, Reed heard himself say, "You'll stay with me until your mum recovers." The words left his mouth before his brain could fully process them. Reed Mercer, the man who avoided commitment like the plague, who maintained shallow relationships by choice, who kept a spotless home where nothing was out of place. This same man was offering shelter to 3 children he barely knew. But they weren't just any children, were they? They were Sloane's children. And by the timing, possibly his children too, though that was a bridge he wasn't ready to cross in his mind yet. The girls looked at him in surprise. "You're going to take care of us?" Maisie asked, uncertain. "Yes," Reed answered, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. I'll look after you until your mom is okay." "Why?" June asked, suspicious. "You don't even know us." Reed thought about telling them he knew their mother, that maybe he was more than a stranger to their family, but decided this wasn't the time. "Because you need help," he said simply. "And I can help." A doctor approached, interrupting their conversation. "Mr. Mercer, the patient is being prepped for surgery. We need you to sign some documents." Reed nodded and turned to the girls. "Wait here, okay? I'll be back in a minute." As he walked with the doctor, Reed noticed the girls trembling slightly. Of course, they'd come by ambulance, probably without time to grab coats, and the hospital was cold. After signing the necessary paperwork, Reed returned to the girls, who were huddled together in a single chair, hugging each other for warmth. "Come on," he said. "Let's buy some coats for you." There was a convenience shop on the hospital's ground floor that sold basic items. Reed bought 3 children's coats, the best he could find, as well as snacks, juices, and some simple toys to keep them occupied. When he handed them the coats, he witnessed something that clenched his heart, genuine gratitude in their eyes. "Thank you," June said softly as she put on the red coat. "We were cold." "I never thought anyone would do that for us," Maisie added, already wrapped in a blue coat. Wren said nothing. She just hugged the yellow coat to her chest for a moment, as if it were an embrace, before putting it on. Reed felt something strange in his chest, like something long hardened and cold inside him had begun to crack. An almost painful sensation, yet somehow comforting, as though a broken part of him was finally starting to heal. "Let's find a better place to wait," he said, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. "Your mom will be in surgery for a while." As they walked toward a more comfortable waiting room, one reserved for families of patients undergoing surgery, Reed couldn't stop thinking about Sloane. 8 years ago, she had simply vanished. One day, they'd been discussing future plans. The next, she was gone. No explanations, no note, no phone call, nothing. As if she'd evaporated. Reed had looked for her for months, hired detectives, searched every corner he could. Eventually, he had to accept she didn't want to be found. That was when he built walls around his heart and swore never again to let anyone close enough to hurt him like that. And now here she was, unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for her life. With 3 daughters, triplets, who were exactly the right age to be... No, he couldn't let himself think about that now. The important thing was to ensure Sloane got the medical care she needed and that the girls were safe. The rest, the questions, explanations, the past, the future, would have to wait. Night fell over the hospital with agonizing slowness. Reed watched the triplets asleep on the sofa in the VIP waiting room he'd managed to secure with his influence. They were curled up together like puppies seeking warmth, Wren in the middle, protected by her sisters. Their new coats served as makeshift blankets. The surgeon had come out an hour ago to give an update. "We managed to control the internal bleeding," he explained. "But she's still in critical condition. She'll need to remain in the ICU at least until tomorrow." Reed nodded, absorbing the information. "Then what?" "If all goes well, we'll transfer her to a room. But recovery will be long. Head trauma doesn't heal overnight." The girls didn't understand everything, but they caught the gist. Their mom was alive, but she wouldn't wake up that night. Now, watching them sleep, Reed pulled out his phone to cancel his attendance at tomorrow's meeting. He also texted his assistant to reschedule his commitments for the next few days. For the first time in years, work didn't seem that important. "Mr. Mercer?" A middle-aged nurse named Nancy appeared at the door, wearing a name badge. "I found a restroom for the girls. It has a sofa bed and a private bathroom. It's not ideal, but it's better than staying here." Reed stood, grateful. "Thank you, Nancy. That helps a lot." The nurse smiled. "It's not every day we see someone like you spending the night in a hospital to care for children. Most executives I've met hardly have time for their own families." There was something in her tone that made Reed feel slightly uncomfortable, as if receiving praise he didn't deserve. "Extraordinary situations call for extraordinary measures," he replied, trying to sound casual. Nancy simply nodded, her gaze implying she understood more than he was saying. Reed walked over to the sofa, reluctant to wake the girls who had finally found some rest after such a traumatic day. Gently, he touched June's shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, "we found a better place to sleep." All three woke almost at the same time, in that mysterious synchrony that seemed to connect them. For a moment, they looked disoriented until reality returned. They were at the hospital. Their mom was in the ICU, and this well-dressed stranger was their temporary protector. "Did Mom wake up?" Maisie asked hopefully. Reed shook his head. "Not yet, sweetheart, but she's getting the best care." Wren rubbed her sleepy eyes. "Can we see her?" "Not yet, but tomorrow morning we'll ask. Okay?" They nodded, resigned. Reed helped them stand, noticing how light they were, almost too fragile for 5-year-olds. They followed Nancy down the silent corridor to a small room where a sofa bed was already set up with clean sheets and pillows. "Thank you," June said to the nurse, surprising Reed with her politeness despite the exhaustion and the situation. Nancy smiled. "You're welcome, sweetheart. There's a bathroom there." She pointed to a door. "And I brought some toothbrushes and pajamas from the pediatric unit. They might be a little big, but they're clean and comfy." After the nurse left, Reed helped the girls get ready for bed. It was a completely new experience for him, tying up hair so it wouldn't get in the way during toothbrushing, checking if the pajamas were on correctly, making sure all had a chance to use the bathroom. When the three were finally settled on the sofa bed, Reed realized there was nowhere left for him to sleep except for 2 uncomfortable chairs in the corner of the room. It didn't matter, he had spent sleepless nights for far less. "Aren't you going to sleep?" Maisie asked, watching him. "I'll stay in the chairs," he answered, trying to sound unconcerned. The three exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations only siblings can have. "There's space here," June said, shifting to make room for him on the edge of the sofa bed. Reed hesitated. "No need. I'm okay on—" "Mom always sleeps with us when we're scared," Wren interrupted, her tiny but resolute voice. That simple statement hit him with unexpected force. Of course they were scared. Their entire world was collapsing, and he was so worried about maintaining a professional distance that he hadn't considered how much they needed comfort. "All right," he gave in, sitting on the edge of the sofa bed, "but just until you fall asleep." Wren, the quietest of the three, surprised him by taking his hand. "Can you tell us a story? Mom always tells one before bed." Reed swallowed hard. Stories? He didn't know how to tell bedtime stories. His repertoire was limited to PowerPoint presentations and contract negotiations. "I don't really know many children's stories," he admitted. "Make one up," Maisie suggested, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Reed took a deep breath, trying to think of something suitable for 5-year-olds. "Okay, let's try. Once upon a time there was a very busy man," he began improvising. "He spent all day working in his office in a tall tower, so high that sometimes he could see the clouds outside the window." "Was he happy?" June asked, already invested in the story. Reed paused. He thought he had everything he believed he needed. A big house, fancy cars, expensive clothes. "But did he have a family?" Wren asked. The question caught him off guard. "No, he lived alone. He didn't have time for a family." "Then he wasn't really happy," Maisie concluded with that peculiar wisdom children have. Reed continued, now more engaged in the story. One day, as he was leaving the office, he found 3 lost birds in the middle of the city. They were cold and hungry, and no one stopped to help them. "What did he do?" Wren asked, her eyes shining with interest. "Well, at first he was going to walk right by. He was late for an important meeting, but something made him stop. Maybe the way the birds looked at him, as if they knew that, despite his rush, he could help. Did he help them?" June seemed genuinely worried about the fate of the fictional birds. Reed smiled. "Yes, he did. He took the birds home, fed them, and gave them a warm place to sleep. And something strange happened." "What?" the three asked at the same time. That big house, which had always felt so empty and quiet, suddenly felt like a home. The busy man realized that, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about work, or money, or meetings. He was just there, taking care of someone other than himself. The girls were smiling now, already half asleep but still paying attention. "And did they stay together forever?" Ren asked with a yawn. Reed hesitated, unsure of the ending. "I don't know, that story is still being written." It was an honest answer. He had no idea what would happen when Sloane woke up, or what to do about the strange feelings these girls awakened in him. He realized all three had finally drifted off to sleep, but instead of standing up like he'd planned, Reed leaned back against the wall, still holding Ren's hand. He pulled out his phone with his free hand and, after a moment of hesitation, sent an email to his VP. "Family emergency. Take over this week's commitments. Details later." Family emergency. The words made him pause. These girls weren't his family. He didn't even know if they were his daughters, though the possibility tormented him every time he looked at them. Sloane had left his life 8 years ago, and he'd moved on, or so he told himself. Eventually, exhausted by the emotionally draining day, Reed fell asleep sitting up, still holding Ren's hand. He woke hours later to a gentle tap on his shoulder. Nurse Nancy was back, carrying a breakfast tray. "Sorry to wake you, Mr. Mercer," she whispered, "but I thought you might want some breakfast before the girls wake up." Reed straightened carefully so as not to disturb the children. His neck hurt from the awkward position in which he'd slept, and his suit was wrinkled beyond saving. "Thank you, Nancy," he said quietly, accepting the cup of coffee. "Any news on Sloane Archer?" "The ICU doctor will come speak with you soon, but she stayed stable through the night, which is already a good sign." Reed nodded, grateful for the update. "I also brought some more clothes from the pediatric unit," Nancy continued, indicating a package on the table. "And a change of clothes for you from the donation closet. They're not designer, but they're clean and should fit." He looked at the simple clothing, jeans and a basic grey t-shirt. Under normal circumstances, he'd never wear such a thing. But these were not normal circumstances. "Thank you very much, Nancy. That's very kind." The nurse smiled, and there was something in her eyes, a mix of approval and curiosity. "You know, I've worked in this hospital for 30 years. I've seen plenty of rich, powerful people come through. Few do what you're doing." Reed didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to compliments about his character. Usually he heard about his competence, his business savvy, his ability to close tough deals, never about kindness. "I don't really know what I'm doing, to be honest," he admitted in a low voice. Nancy shrugged. "The best things we do in life are rarely planned, Mr. Mercer." After the nurse left, Reed sipped his coffee, watching the girls sleep. They looked so small and vulnerable, yet so confident in his protection. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. An hour later, the triplets began to wake almost in sync. First Maisie, then June, and finally Ren, all rubbing sleepy eyes. "Good morning," Reed said, trying to sound cheerful. "They brought breakfast for you." The girls sat up, still yawning, looking with curiosity at the trays: milk, toast, jam, and fruit. It wasn't fancy, but by the way their eyes widened, it seemed like a feast. "All this is for us?" June asked, incredulous. Reed nodded, puzzled by their reaction. "Yes, of course. You need to eat well." They exchanged glances again with that silent communication before they began eating slowly at first, then more eagerly. As Reed watched them eat, June suddenly stopped and looked at him seriously. "Will we get to see Mom today?" "I hope so. The doctor will come talk to us soon and we'll ask," he answered. "What if she doesn't wake up?" Maisie asked, giving voice to the fear they all shared. "She will," Reed replied with more confidence than he felt. "Your mom is very strong. She always was." "How do you know our mom?" Ren asked out of the blue. Reed hesitated. What could he say? How to explain the complexity of their relationship to 5-year-olds? "We were friends. A long time ago," he finally said. "Before we were born," June asked. "Yes, before you were born." "Why aren't you friends anymore?" Maisie continued her interrogation. Reed took a deep breath. "Sometimes adults lose each other. Life goes in different directions." The girls seemed to accept that explanation, at least for the moment. They finished breakfast in relative silence, only occasionally whispering among themselves. After breakfast, Reed helped them get dressed with the clothes Nancy had provided. Simple but colorful outfits the three seemed to enjoy. Once they were ready, the ICU doctor finally appeared. Dr. Lauren Chen was a competent-looking woman with gentle eyes that softened her serious expression. She explained Sloane's condition in simple words, aware of the children listening. "Your mum is recovering well from surgery. Her vital signs are stable, which is excellent, but she still hasn't woken up, which is normal considering the head trauma she suffered." "Can we see her?" Maisie asked, holding Reed's hand. Dr. Chen hesitated. "Typically, children aren't allowed in the ICU." "Please," June begged, "just for a little bit. We promise to be quiet." The doctor looked at Reed, who nodded slightly. "It would be important for them," he said. "After a trauma like this, seeing their mother, even if she's unconscious, could help." Dr. Chen sighed. "All right, 5 minutes, no more, and you must be very calm." As they walked to the ICU, Reed felt the triplets' hands clinging to his. Maisie and June each holding one hand, and Ren just behind, gripping his shirt. They were nervous but determined. The ICU was an intimidating environment, full of beeping machines, blinking lights, and medical staff constantly on the move. The girls huddled closer to Reed, seeking protection from the unfamiliar. When they reached Sloane's bed, they froze momentarily, shocked by the sight. Their mother, who always seemed so strong in their eyes, looked pale, hooked up to tubes and wires. Part of her head was bandaged, and bruises were visible on her face. Reed felt his own heart constrict. Even after 8 years, even after all the pain of separation, seeing Sloane like that affected him deeply. "Can she hear us?" Ren whispered, barely audible. "Some studies suggest she might," Dr. Chen answered kindly. "Talking to her can only help." Encouraged, the girls approached the bed. June, always the boldest, spoke first. "Hi, Mom. We're here," she said, gently touching Sloane's hand. "Mr. Reed is taking care of us. He bought us coats and we had breakfast with milk and toast." Maisie joined her sister. "We slept on a big couch, and he told us a story about lost birds. You need to wake up soon," Ren added, her voice quivering slightly. "We miss you." Reed watched the scene, feeling like an intruder in this intimate family moment. 3 small girls against the clinical backdrop of the ICU, talking to their unconscious mother. There was something so pure, so honest about it, that he had to avert his gaze, feeling his eyes burn. When their time was up, they returned to the small waiting room. The girls were silent, processing the experience. Reed tried to encourage them, promising they could come back later, that their mum was in good hands, that everything would be okay. During lunch at the hospital cafeteria, Maisie suddenly looked at Reed with eyes far too wise for her age. "We don't have any money, you know," she said bluntly. "Mom's been out of work for a while." Reed paused, taken aback by her directness. "Sometimes we didn't have enough food," June added, looking at her full plate as if it were something precious. "Mom said she already ate, but it was just so we could eat without worry." The sincerity of their words hit him like a punch. In his mind, he pictured Sloane, once so full of dreams and determination, skipping meals so her daughters could eat, while he dined at fancy restaurants and complained when the wine wasn't at the right temperature. "She works really hard, you know," Ren said softly but clearly. "She sews clothes for people, does laundry too. But still, there's not enough money." Reed swallowed hard, feeling something lodged in his throat. "You went hungry?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. All 3 shook their heads almost in unison. "Not real hunger," June explained. "Mom always found a way. But sometimes it was just instant soup for days." As the girls returned to eating, now chatting about their own childish topics, Reed remained still, absorbing the reality they had just described. He felt the painful clarity of what Sloane's life had been like. He looked at the 3 little girls in front of him, so small, so resilient, yet so vulnerable. Then he knew with a certainty he'd never felt before. He could never unsee this. He could never go back to his comfortable, detached life and pretend he didn't know. Something had changed inside him, irreversibly. The man who'd walked into this hospital yesterday, concerned about contracts and meetings, no longer existed. In his place was someone beginning to see beyond himself, someone who no longer wanted to live indifferently. "You'll never go through that again," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. "I promise." The girls looked up, surprised by the intensity in his voice. In that moment, even without fully understanding, they felt something important had happened. Something that would change everything. A week had passed since the accident. Reed had turned the guest suite in his apartment into an improvised bedroom for the triplets, with 3 small beds delivered the same day he brought them home. The room, once impersonal and cold like the rest of his apartment, now had walls decorated with colorful drawings, toys neatly stored in boxes, and a starry night lamp that projected constellations on the ceiling. Reed's life, once so meticulously organized, now followed a new rhythm, the rhythm of 3 5-year-old girls. "Breakfast is ready," he called one Saturday morning, placing pancakes with chocolate syrup on the kitchen table, something he never imagined doing, considering that his breakfast used to be an espresso gulped down while checking emails. The sound of little feet echoed down the hall, and in seconds the 3 appeared, still in pajamas, hair disheveled, sleepy smiles on their faces. "There's chocolate," Maisie exclaimed, the first to reach the table. "Sit up straight," Reed gently reminded them as he poured orange juice into 3 colorful cups, another new item in his home, since all his glasses had been crystally unsuitable for small hands. It was surprising how quickly he'd adapted to this new routine. Waking up earlier to make breakfast, helping with baths and picking out clothes, brushing 3 heads of curly hair, a skill he learned through online tutorials, driving them to the hospital to visit their mom every day, reading bedtime stories. "Are we going to see Mom today?" June asked, always the practical one. "Yes, after lunch," Reed replied. "Remember, the doctor said she's doing a lot better." The 3 nodded. Sloane had been out of the ICU for 3 days, moved to a private room Reed had made sure was the best in the hospital. She still hadn't fully woken up, but the doctors were optimistic. She was responding to stimuli, her vital signs kept improving. "Should we take the drawing we made?" asked Wren, the quietest of the 3, but who seemed to open up more every day. "Of course," Reed smiled. "I'm sure she'll love it when she wakes up." After breakfast, the routine continued. Reed supervised toothbrushing, still an occasional battle, helped pick clothes, and then came the part he liked best: playtime. In the beginning, he hadn't known how to interact with kids. His nephews rarely saw him, and he was always the uncle who brought expensive gifts but never stayed to play. Now, he was sitting on the living room rug, building a pillow and blanket fort. "Higher on this side," June directed, the group's natural architect. "We need a flag," declared Maisie, ever attentive to details. Wren just watched, smiling before pulling out a colorful scarf from her small backpack. "How about this?" "Perfect." Reed took the scarf and tied it to a pencil, placing it at the top of their makeshift fort. Seeing the joy in their eyes still surprised him. How could they have so much fun with such simple things? He, who spent fortunes on fine dining and luxury trips, had never experienced the sheer happiness he felt now, playing hide-and-seek or making up stories on the spot. Sometimes, in the midst of these games, Reed was struck by the realization that he could be their father. The dates didn't match perfectly. Sloane had disappeared 8 years ago, and the girls were 5, but the question lingered, especially when he noticed small gestures or expressions that reminded him of himself. After lunch, pasta with tomato sauce, another new addition to Reed's menu, they got ready to go to the hospital. This was a routine the girls took seriously. Each one picked an item to bring to their mum's room. "To make the place prettier while she's sleeping," Maisie had explained on the first day. Today, Maisie was carrying a plastic flower she'd received at the hospital gift shop. June chose a photo they'd taken at the park 2 days earlier. And Wren, always surprising, was bringing a small origami bird Reed had taught her to fold. In the car, conversation now flowed naturally. The girls had overcome their initial shyness and chatted non-stop, telling stories, asking questions, sometimes singing children's songs Reed now knew by heart. "Mr. Reed," Wren called from the back seat. They always called him Mr. "Reed," despite his attempts to convince them to drop the title. "Yes, Wren? When Mom wakes up, will we still get to visit you?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought much about what came after. He was so focused on caring for them, While Sloane recovered, he'd avoided considering what would happen once she was awake. "Of course," he answered automatically, glancing in the rearview mirror to see 3 pairs of attentive eyes. "If your mum allows it, of course." "She will," June said confidently. "Mum always says good people should be kept close." "And you're really cool," Maisie added. "Do you make chocolate pancakes?" Reed smiled, feeling that now familiar tightness in his chest, a mix of affection and fear that had accompanied him since these 3 little figures had entered his life. At the hospital, they followed the now familiar path to Sloane's room. The nurses greeted them by name, some even stopping to chat with the girls. Reed noticed how everyone smiled when they saw the 4 of them together, the always well-dressed executive, though now often with paint or chocolate stains on his sleeves, and the 3 identical little girls following him like ducklings. The room looked as they'd left it the day before, decorated with the girls' drawings, fresh flowers Reed brought daily, and small, colorful items that made the environment feel less clinical. Sloane looked better, color was returning to her face, and the bruises were fading. The doctor had told Reed earlier that morning by phone that her brain activity was normalizing. It was only a matter of time before she fully regained consciousness. The girls immediately began their usual routine, arranging flowers, showing off new gifts, and then, one by one, sitting in the chair beside Sloane's bed to tell her about their day. Reed watched from the doorway, giving them their moment. It was fascinating how they spoke so naturally, as though Sloane could answer. They chatted about breakfast, their games, the new clothes Reed had bought, and the ice cream they had at the park. When they finished, Reed also approached. This had become part of the routine the past few days. He'd sit briefly and say a few words to Sloane. "They're doing fine," he said softly, while the girls organized their drawings on the small table. "They're safe and happy, I think. I'm doing my best." It felt strange talking to her like this after so long. There were so many questions he wanted to ask, so many things he needed to understand, but for now, that would have to wait. Later, back at the apartment, Reed prepared dinner while the girls watched a cartoon. The domestic scenes still sometimes startled him, how his life had changed so completely in just a week. "Bath time," he announced after dinner, greeted by the usual protests that quickly turned into laughter once the bubble monster game started. At bedtime, the 3 were already in their beds, waiting for the nightly story. It was Reed's favorite part of the routine, seeing how they sat quietly, eyes shining with each twist of the tale, asking smart questions in the middle of the narrative. "So then the prince realized the real treasure wasn't gold or jewels," Reed continued, making up the story as he spoke, "but the friends he had made along the journey. Like us and you," Wren said sleepily, surprising him with her observation. "Yeah, we're your treasure now," Maisie agreed, yawning. June, already dozing off, murmured, "And you're ours." Reed felt his heart race at those simple, childlike words. Because they were true, these 3 girls had become his treasure, filling a void he hadn't even known existed. Later, sitting alone on the couch with a glass of water, he'd switched from his usual whiskey to milder drinks since the girls arrived, Reed thought about the past week. How small routines, brushing teeth, telling stories, visiting the hospital, had created stronger bonds than years of adult relationships in his life. The girls trusted him now. They looked for him when they got hurt, laughed at his silly jokes, fell asleep peacefully knowing he'd be there in the morning. And Reed, for the first time in a long while, felt genuinely needed, not for his money or influence, but simply for his presence, for being someone who listened, who played, who cared. Reed's phone rang late at night, rousing him from the nap he'd slipped into on the couch. The hospital's name flashed on the screen, making his heart pound. "Hello," he answered, sitting upright. "Mr. Mercer, this is Dr. Patel. We have good news. Ms. Archer is beginning to regain consciousness. We thought you might want to be here." Reed glanced at the clock, 11:37 p.m. The girls had been asleep for hours. "I'm on my way," he said without hesitation. "Can I bring her daughters?" There was a brief pause. "Well, normally children aren't allowed after visiting hours. But under the circumstances, we'll make an exception. Please keep them calm." Of course. Thank you, Doctor. Reed hung up and took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. Sloane was waking up. After a week in a coma, she was finally coming around. The flood of relief he felt was so overwhelming, he had to sit down again for a moment. He got up decisively and went to the girls' room. In the dark, he could make out their small forms asleep in their new beds. He hesitated for a second. Maybe it would be better to let them sleep and go alone. But no, they deserved to be there when their mum opened her eyes. "Girls," he called softly, turning on the bedside lamp. "Wake up. I have good news." Wren was the first to open her eyes, followed by Maisie and then June. They looked confused, blinking at the soft light. "What's going on?" June asked, her voice rough with sleep. "Your mum is waking up," he said, and as if by magic, the drowsiness left their eyes, replaced by instant excitement. "Right now?" Maisie sat up, already throwing off the covers. "Yes, right now. The doctor just called." "Shall we go see her?" Within minutes, all three were dressed, pajamas still underneath their coats, sneakers hastily slipped on, hair minimally brushed. Reed had never seen children get ready so fast. In the car, any lingering sleepiness had vanished, replaced by near-frenzied excitement. "Is Mom going to come home with us?" Wren asked from the back seat. "Not right away," Reed explained, managing expectations. "She'll still need to stay in the hospital for a few days to make sure everything's okay, but this is a big step." "Will she remember us?" Maisie's voice held a worry that squeezed Reed's heart. "Of course she will," he reassured her. "She could never forget you." "But the doctor said she hit her head," June pointed out pragmatically, as always. "On TV, people forget everything when they hit their head." Reed smiled despite the tension. "Real life is different from TV. Mom might be a bit confused at first, but I'm sure she'll recognize you." What he didn't say was that he was nervous too, not about the possibility of Sloane forgetting the girls, but about the inevitable moment she'd recognize him. How would she react to seeing him after 8 years? What would she say when she learned he'd been caring for her daughters? They arrived at the hospital in record time. Nancy, the nurse who had grown fond of the girls, was waiting at reception despite the late hour. "Hello, little ones," she smiled, crouching to their level. "Your mum is starting to wake up, but we have to be very quiet and calm, okay? She's still fragile." The three nodded solemnly, their faces adopting expressions of almost comic seriousness. "How is she?" Reed asked as they walked to the elevator. "Better than expected," Nancy said softly. She opened her eyes a few times, but is still quite confused. She recognized her name, which is a great sign. "Doctor." Patel was waiting for them in the hallway of the inpatient unit, his face tired but with a hint of a smile. "Mr. Mercer, girls," he greeted. "Your mother is drifting in and out of consciousness, which is normal at this stage. When we go in, speak quietly and slowly, all right? Bright lights and loud noises can bother her." Reed held Wren's hand, and who seemed the most nervous of the three. "It'll be fine," he whispered to her, and she nodded slightly. The room was dimly lit, only by the soft glow of the bedside lamp and the monitors. Sloane lay in the same bed where she'd spent the past week, but something was different. Her eyes were open, staring vaguely at the ceiling. The girls froze at the door, suddenly shy or perhaps frightened by their mum's appearance in this state. Reed felt Wren squeeze his hand tighter. "Go on," he encouraged gently. "She wants to see you." June was the first to move, always the bravest. She approached the bed slowly, her sisters right behind. "Mom?" she called softly. Sloane's face turned toward the voice, her eyes initially unfocused, then growing sharper as she recognized her daughter. "June?" Her voice was rough, nearly a whisper. "Yes, it's me." June couldn't contain her excitement, stepping closer. "Us too," Maisie chimed in, pulling Wren along. Sloane's eyes widened slightly, filling with tears at the sight of her three daughters. Her trembling hand lifted to touch June's face, then moved gently toward the other two. "My girls," she murmured. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Maisie answered. "Mister, Reed took care of us. He's really nice." That was when Sloane noticed the tall figure standing a few steps behind her daughters. Reed saw the exact moment she recognized him, the shock in her eyes, the confusion. the disbelief. "Reed," she whispered, his name an entire question. He took a few cautious steps closer, uncertain of how to proceed. 8 years had passed since they'd last seen each other. 8 years of silence, unanswered questions, and a pain that had never fully healed. "Hi, Sloane," he said simply. She looked from him to the girls, as if trying to understand the unlikely connection between them. "Mr. Reed bought us coats," Wren explained, breaking the tense silence. "And food, and he let us stay at his place," June added. "We have our own room there." "He comes to visit you every day at the hospital," Maisie finished. Sloane stared at Reed with an expression that was hard to decipher. Surprise, confusion, maybe gratitude, but also something that looked like fear. Dr. Patel walked in at that moment, diffusing the tension. "How are you feeling, Ms. Archer?" he asked, checking the monitors. "Confused," she answered, still looking at Reed. "What? How?" "Maybe we should talk in private," the doctor suggested, glancing at the girls. "Nancy, could you take the children for some hot chocolate while I speak with Ms. Archer and Mr. Mercer?" Nancy nodded, extending her hands toward the girls. "Come on, little ones, let's let your mom rest a bit, and we'll be right back with hot chocolate." The triplets looked at Sloane, reluctant to leave now that they finally had her back. "Just for a little while," Sloane reassured them, her voice stronger now. "You can come back soon, I promise." After careful kisses and hugs, the girls followed Nancy out, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Dr. Patel briefly explained Sloane's medical condition, the accident, the injuries, the surgery, the week-long coma. He spoke of her surprisingly good recovery, given the severity, but emphasized she needed more days in the hospital and weeks of rest at home. As the doctor spoke, Reed noticed Sloane's eyes never left him, as though she still couldn't believe he was really there. "All right, I'll leave you two alone for a few minutes," Dr. Patel concluded. "Don't tire her out too much, Mr. Mercer. Ms. Archer still needs plenty of rest." When the door closed, the silence became almost palpable. Reed stepped closer to the bed, sitting in the chair where he'd spent so many hours over the past week. "How are you feeling?" he asked, lacking anything better to say. "Like I got hit by a truck," she replied with a faint ironic smile, surprising him with her humor. Then, more seriously, "The girls, they're really with you?" Reed nodded. "Yes. They're staying with me. I've been taking care of them." He saw her eyes fill with tears again, something that hardly ever happened back when he knew her. She'd always been strong, independent, too proud to show vulnerability. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They needed help," Reed answered simply. "No one else came." Sloane closed her eyes for a moment, a tear escaping and sliding down her cheek. When she opened them again, they reflected a mixture of emotions, gratitude, but also anxiety. "Thank you," she said softly. Then, after a moment, "You stayed." It wasn't exactly a question, but there was a disbelief in her voice that hit Reed, as if the idea of someone, of him, choosing to stay was foreign to her now. "Staying was the only right choice I've made in a long time," he replied, surprised at the honesty in his own words. A silence hung between them, not entirely uncomfortable but heavy with unasked questions. "Reed, she began, but her voice faltered. She took a deep breath and tried again. "You must be wondering about everything." He nodded. "I do have some questions, yes, but we don't have to talk about it now. You just woke up from a coma." "No," she said, her gaze steady on his. "I need you to understand. After I left, I found out I was pregnant." She paused. "They're not yours, if that's what you're thinking. I met someone else, 3 months later. I thought I could move on." Reed absorbed the information, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. After a week caring for the girls, he'd begun imagining them as part of his life. Their father. "He left when he found out I was pregnant," Sloane interrupted before he could finish, "and when the doctor said it was triplets, he was already in another state. I never saw him again." Reed felt anger toward this unknown man, this absent father who'd abandoned Sloane and 3 innocent children. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. "I moved on," she continued, eyes drifting as though reliving those memories. At first it was nearly impossible. 3 babies at once, no help, not enough money. But you manage, right? I did what I had to. Reed listened, aware he was getting a glimpse of the life she'd built without him during those 8 years they were apart. I worked as much as I could while pregnant. Then with the girls, I did whatever I could. Laundry, sewing, cleaning, when I could find someone to watch them. Her voice grew steadier as she told her story, as though recounting it gave her strength. Sometimes there wasn't enough for rent and food. I chose food, of course. I'd negotiate with the landlord, promised to pay double the next month. Reed tried to imagine Sloane, brilliant, proud, once so full of dreams, facing such hardship alone. The girls never had health insurance, she went on. I never had a formal job after they were born. Who'd hire a single mum with triplets? So I prayed none of them got sick. When it happened, I used home remedies or begged favors from doctors I knew. They told me, Reed said softly, that you skipped meals so they could eat. Sloane closed her eyes briefly, and Reed saw the pain in her face. They noticed. I thought I'd hidden it well. Kids see more than we think. She nodded slowly. We were short of everything, except love for them. Her voice was firm despite the tears shining in her eyes. On the hardest nights, when I doubted we'd make it through the month, I watched them sleep and thought, I can't give up. I have no right. Then I'd get up the next day and try again. Reed listened intently, taking in every word, every piece of the life she'd led without him. A hard life of constant sacrifice, but also a life of tremendous love that kept her going. Why didn't you reach out for help? He finally asked. Your family? Friends? Me? Sloane looked at him, her eyes holding some old hurt or perhaps resignation. My family, my mum lives far away and she has health problems. She already has enough to worry about. I couldn't burden her too. As for you, she looked away. I thought you didn't want me in your life anymore. Reed sensed there was more to the story, something she wasn't saying. But before he could ask, the door opened and the triplets returned, clutching cups of hot chocolate and all talking at once about the candy machine Nancy had shown them. Reed stepped back, giving Sloane space for her daughters. He watched their interaction, the love in Sloane's eyes, the girl's joy at having her back, and felt a profound realization. This woman he had once loved with all his heart had faced adversity that would break many people. Abandonment, poverty, the crushing responsibility of raising 3 children alone. Any one of those burdens could be too much, altogether seemed impossible. But Sloane hadn't just survived. She had protected her daughters, ensuring they felt loved and safe, even when she had little more than hope to cling to. She didn't break. She wasn't bitter, didn't give up, didn't let circumstances define who she was or what kind of mother she would be. She adapted, found strength where others would see only despair, turned every tiny chance into something that could feed not just bodies, but also spirits. Watching her now, smiling at the girls despite the physical pain, despite the flicker of fear in her eyes whenever she looked at him, Reed felt an admiration that went beyond everything he'd ever felt before, even the love they once shared. Mom, Mr. Reed said we can bring our drawings tomorrow to decorate your room, Maisie was saying, completely oblivious to the intensity of the moment. That would be wonderful, honey, Sloane replied, gently touching her daughter's face. Reed stayed a little apart, feeling simultaneously part of that small family circle and an outside observer. The questions were still there. Why she really left, what happened in those 8 years, whether there was room for him in their lives now, but they could wait. For now, it was enough to know that Sloane was alive, conscious, and that he had somehow found his way back into her orbit, even if only temporarily. The rest, the future, was yet to be written. 3 days passed after Sloane regained consciousness. Her recovery impressed the doctors. Each day she regained more strength, more mental clarity, and more color in her once pale cheeks. Dr. Patel talked about discharging her the following week, provided she had proper home care. Reed had established a routine. In the morning, he took the girls for a quick visit before school, which they had resumed on Monday. In the afternoon, after picking them up, They returned for a longer visit, bringing new drawings, stories from their day, and shared snacks. Sometimes Reed left the triplets with Sloane while he dealt with work matters, giving mother and daughters time alone. That sunny afternoon, Nancy suggested the girls play in the hospital's garden. "Fresh air will do them good," she commented, "and Ms. Archer could use some quiet time," Reed agreed. The girls were getting restless, confined to the hospital room, and Sloane, although she never complained, did look tired after days of lively visits. "Who wants to go play in the garden?" he asked once the girls had finished showing Sloane their schoolwork. "I do!" Maisie immediately exclaimed. "Are there butterflies?" Wren asked, always fascinated by small creatures. "Probably," Reed smiled. "Let's find out." "Go on, my little ones," Sloane encouraged from the bed. "Then tell me all about the butterflies." Nancy offered to accompany them. "I know a corner with flowers that butterflies love," she said, holding out her hands to Wren and Maisie, while June clutched her small sketchbook to draw whatever she saw. After they left, a comfortable silence settled in the room. Reed sat in the chair beside the bed, watching Sloane as she gazed out the window, where she could see part of the garden. "They're happy," Sloane said. "You've been wonderful with them." "They're incredible kids," Reed replied. "Smart, kind, full of life. You did an amazing job, Sloane." She smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I did what I could." "It wasn't always enough." "It was more than enough," he insisted. "They're proof." He looked toward the garden, where the girls were now running after something, probably a butterfly, under Nancy's watchful eye. This was the moment, possibly the only quiet one they'd have for a while. "Sloane," he began, his voice more serious, "there's something I need to ask you. Something I've carried with me for 8 years." She turned to him, and Reed saw in her eyes that she already knew what was coming. Still, she nodded, bracing herself. "Why did you leave me?" The question hung between them, almost tangible in its simplicity and the weight it carried. Sloane looked away, fixing her gaze on the garden again, as if seeking strength in the sight of her children playing carefreely. "For a long time," she began slowly, "I thought it was the right thing to do. The only thing to do." "But why?" Reed pressed. "We were happy. At least I thought we were. We talked about getting married, building a life together. Then overnight you just disappeared." Sloane closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, Reed saw an old pain in them, a wound that had never fully healed. "2 weeks before I left, your father invited me to lunch," she finally said. "My father." Reed felt a chill. Douglas Mercer was not a man of spontaneous gestures. Every move, every word he uttered had a calculated purpose. "Yes, Douglas. He said he wanted to get to know me better. Since you talked about our future together, I thought it was odd, but I was happy. I figured he was finally accepting me." Reed's stomach sank. "What happened at that lunch?" "At first, it was pleasant, I guess. He was charming, talked about you, how proud he was, asked about my studies, my career plans. Then," Sloane paused, visibly uncomfortable with the memory. "Then he changed, subtly at first, started asking about my family, my finances, my connections in the business world." Reed shut his eyes, already anticipating where this was going. "He humiliated me, Reed," Sloane went on, her voice trembling slightly. "He was so refined in how he did it. At first I didn't even realize what was happening. With that impeccable politeness, that icy smile, he told me things that tore down every bit of confidence I had." "What exactly did he say?" Reed asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "He said you would discard me, that I was just a phase, maybe a charity case, or your form of rebellion against him." Sloane took a shaky breath. "He said I was an embarrassment to you and your family, that your friends and co-workers all laughed at you behind your back because of me, that I was ruining your future, your chances in the company." Anger welled up in Reed, a cold fury he'd never felt before, not even when Sloane disappeared. "He had statistics, Reed," she added, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Literally printed charts showing how relationships between people from different social classes rarely last. How I would ruin your chances of success, of belonging in the right circles." "That's ridiculous," Reed muttered, raking a hand through his hair in frustration. For you, maybe. But for me, I was 22, from a family that barely got by. You were everything I dreamed of, but part of me always wondered when you'd realize you could do better. There was no better, Sloane. You were all I wanted. She smiled sadly. I know that now. But your father, he basically confirmed all my deepest fears and made it sound like he was doing us both a favor. A favor? Reed felt his anger flare hotter. He said he was being kind by talking to me directly, instead of letting me find out the hard way when you eventually got tired of me, that I should have enough dignity to leave on my own before you did, that it would be better for everyone, that you needed someone on your level. So he pushed me out of your life with polite, cruel words, she concluded. So skillfully that I left that lunch convinced I was doing the right thing by ending it with you. Reed was stunned. He knew his father, a ruthless businessman who always got what he wanted at any cost, but he never imagined he'd interfere so directly in his personal life with such cruelty. Why didn't you come talk to me? He finally asked. Why not give me the chance to deny all of it? He anticipated that, Sloane replied. Said you would deny it, of course, because you were a gentleman, that you probably believed you loved me, but eventually you'd see your mistake, and that I would always wonder if he was right. She paused, her hands clenched on the blanket. The worst part was when he offered me money. He what? Reed's voice came out louder than intended. He offered to pay me to go away, a fresh start, he called it. Said it was an investment in his son's future. When I refused, he gave me that smile. You know the one. Reed did. The smile of a man who knows he holds all the cards, who's already won before the game begins. He said you had already agreed to break up with me, Sloane continued, her voice quieter now, that you were just looking for the right way to do it without hurting me. He showed me photos of you with Victoria Granham at a benefit gala. She shrugged. Victoria was everything I wasn't. Rich, sophisticated, from your world. Reed remembered those photos. A company event where Victoria, daughter of one of his father's associates, practically threw herself at him when photographers arrived. Photos his father made sure were highlighted. That meant nothing, he said, voice tight with frustration. It was just publicity for the company. You know how those events work. I know now, but back then... Sloane sighed. I left thinking it was the right thing to do, that I was setting you free for the life you truly deserved, that someday you'd thank me even if you never knew. Reed stood, unable to contain the energy coursing through him. He walked to the window, watching the girls still playing in the garden, unaware of the conversation changing everything. He had no right, Reed said finally, his voice low but resolute. No right to decide for us, to manipulate you, to destroy what we had. He's your father, Sloane said simply. He thought he was protecting you. No. Reed turned to face her. He was controlling me, like he always did, molding my life as he saw fit, never caring what I actually wanted. Sloane observed him, noticing the change in his expression, the determination that now hardened his features. What are you going to do? She asked softly. Something I should have done a long time ago, he replied. I'm going to talk to my father. Mercer Tower rose in the financial district like a monument to Douglas Mercer's success and power. Reed parked in his usual spot, the same one he'd used since he began working for his father's company years ago. On the way from the hospital to the tower, his initial anger had cooled into something more resolute. It wasn't just about Sloane, he realized. It was about an entire life steered by a man who confused control with love, who weighed relationships by strategic value. In the elevator, he straightened his tie out of habit. His reflection in the mirrored wall looked the same as always, flawless suit, neat hair, upright posture. But something had changed in his eyes. A clarity, a resolve that hadn't been there before. His father's secretary tried to stop him. Mr. Mercer is in an important meeting. But Reed swept past as if he hadn't heard. He opened the door to his father's office without knocking, finding Douglas on the phone behind his imposing mahogany desk. Douglas looked up, surprised by the interruption, but his face quickly broke into a smile when he saw his son. I have to hang up, Stanley. We'll continue later. He placed the phone down. Reed. What a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking about you. That hospital contract. Sloan Archer, Reed interrupted, his voice calm but firm. Douglas paused, confused. Excuse me? Sloan Archer, Reed repeated. The woman you drove out of my life 8 years ago. A brief flicker of recognition crossed Douglas's eyes, quickly replaced by a neutral expression. Oh, yes, your college girlfriend. What about her? She told me everything, Reed said, stepping forward. About the lunch. About how you humiliated and manipulated her into leaving me. Douglas sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. Reed, son, that was 8 years ago, and it was for your own good. That girl wasn't right for you. Not right for me, according to whom? Reed cut him off. You. What gave you the right to decide that? I'm your father, Douglas answered, his tone turning a bit colder. Everything I did was to protect you from a mistake that would have jeopardized your future. She didn't understand our world, our position. It would have been a disaster. You don't know that, Reed retorted. You had no way of knowing. But you destroyed what we had anyway. I built everything you have. Douglas stood up now, his tone turning icier. This company, your career, your standing in society, all of it exists because I made it possible. Do you think you'd be where you are if you tied yourself to a girl without resources or connections? Reed felt a strange calm before his father's outburst. You know what the irony is, he asked, a sad smile on his lips. I could have been truly happy with her. We could have built something real, something that truly mattered. Sentimental nonsense, Douglas scoffed. Life isn't a fairy tale, son. It's about strategic decisions, necessary sacrifices. No, Reed took another step closer. That's your life, not mine. Not anymore. Douglas narrowed his eyes, assessing his son as he would a business rival. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying you destroyed the thing I loved most, and you'll never have that power over me again. Don't be dramatic, Douglas tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. You got over that girl years ago, you moved on. Built a brilliant career just as we planned. As you planned, Reed corrected. And yes, I moved on, built a career, but you know what I never had in all these years, anything real. Anything not measured by its strategic value or by the approval of the right circles. And now you think this woman, who left you 8 years ago, is your great love. Douglas shook his head in disbelief. That's ridiculous, son. You're being manipulated by nostalgia. It's not just about Sloan, Reed replied. It's about you. About how you always decided what was best for me without caring what I really wanted. How you measured every relationship, every friendship, every decision by its potential benefit or risk to your plans. My plans? Douglas sounded genuinely offended. Everything I did was for you, to ensure your success, your future. No, Reed shook his head. It was for you. For your legacy. For your idea of who I should be. Douglas's gaze hardened. Watch your words, son. Remember who paid for everything in your life, who opened doors, who made you who you are today. That's exactly why I'm here, Reed said calmly. To tell you that ends now. I'm done. Done? Done with what? With the company, with your games, with your control, with everything. Douglas gave an incredulous laugh. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. What will you do? Throw away years of work, your inheritance, everything we built together because of a woman who left you 8 years ago? I'm not throwing anything away, Reed replied steadily. I'm choosing what truly matters. He pulled an envelope from his suit pocket and placed it on the desk. My letter of resignation. I've already spoken to the board. My share in the company will be managed by a trust. I'm not selling. I know how much that would mean for you to have full control again, but I'm no longer part of it. Douglas stared at the envelope like it was toxic. You won't last a month without all this. Without me. That's where you're wrong, Reed said. Not with triumph, but with the peace of someone who'd finally found clarity. I think I'll be just fine. Better than ever, actually. When this fantasy ends, don't come crawling back, Douglas warned. There'll be no coming back, Reed replied, with a certainty that surprised even himself. Not to what we had before. That's over. He turned to leave, feeling a massive weight lift from his shoulders, the weight of expectations that had never truly been his own. of a life lived to please a man who would never be satisfied. "Reed," Douglas called as he reached the door. "You're my son, my only son." Reed paused, hand on the doorknob. For a moment, he thought he detected a note of vulnerability in his father's voice, something he had never heard before. He partially turned back. "Yes, I'm your son, and I always will be, but I'm no longer your project or your extension." With those words, he walked out, closing the door softly behind him. There was no anger in his steps, no bitterness in his heart. Only the quiet certainty of a man who had finally found his own path. In the elevator, he felt something unusual, a lightness, as though he could finally breathe fully. His entire adult life, he had made decisions based on his father's approval. Every relationship, every deal, every choice was overshadowed by Douglas Mercer's expectations. Now, for the first time, he was free to choose his own direction, free to love whom he wanted, free to build the life he truly desired. Stepping out of the building, he looked up at the open sky. The future was uncertain. He didn't know if Sloane would accept him back, if they could rebuild what they had, if he'd be welcome in the girls' lives long term. So many questions without answers. But there was one certainty in his heart. He had just closed a chapter. He had broken free from the toxic influence that had steered his life for so long. And in doing so, he had reclaimed something precious he hadn't realized he'd lost, his emotional autonomy. He got into his car and started the engine. It was time to return to the hospital. Back to Sloane. Back to what could be the start of something real, built not on expectations or convenience, but on something far more valuable: love. The sky was darkening by the time Reed returned to the hospital. The confrontation with his father had been difficult but liberating. For the first time in years, perhaps in his entire adult life, he felt genuinely in control of his own choices, no longer an extension of Douglas Mercer's desires and ambitions. The hospital hallways were quieter at that hour. Visiting time was ending, and most visitors were saying their goodbyes. The Triplets had gone home with Nancy, the nurse who'd become a friend of the family, so they could sleep at a proper time. Reed had promised them he'd tell everything to their mother and would be back first thing in the morning. He paused at the door of Sloane's room, watching her for a moment. She was sitting up in bed, flipping through a magazine. The soft bedside lamp cast a golden glow on her dark hair, highlighting the features of the face he'd never truly forgotten, even after 8 years. Feeling his presence, she looked up and smiled. A tentative but genuine smile. "Hey." "Hey," he replied, walking into the room. Something in his expression must have revealed the intensity of his recent encounter, because Sloane's smile faded into concern. "What happened? Are you okay?" Reed sat in the chair beside the bed, feeling strangely calm despite the emotional storm inside him. "I talked to my father," he said simply. "How did it go?" she asked, setting the magazine aside. "Freeing. Hard but necessary. I cut ties with him, the company, everything he stood for in my life." Sloane looked surprised and worried at the same time. "Reed, I never wanted you to—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. It was something that needed to happen. You just helped me see the truth." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It felt as if they both needed that moment to take in everything that had happened, everything that had been revealed, everything that could happen next. Reed looked at Sloane's hand, resting on the blanket, a hand that had once held his with such love, now showing small signs of the hard life she'd lived. Calluses, tiny needle marks, the wear of working to support 3 children. Without overthinking, he reached out and covered her hand with his. Sloane looked down at their joined hands, startled, but she didn't pull away. Her breathing quickened slightly, the only visible sign of the emotion surging through her. "Sloane," Reed said, his voice low and intense. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked at him, her large, expressive eyes locked on his. "After you left, I tried to move on. I buried myself in work, met other people, built a life that seemed to make sense. But the truth is—" He paused, summoning the courage to bare his heart. "I never stopped loving you." The words hung between them, alive and resonant. Reed saw Sloane's eyes fill with tears she was trying to hold back. A tear escaped, tracing a silent path down her cheek. Then another, and another. She cried silently, her body trembling with the force of the bottled-up emotion. Reed waited, giving her the space to process his words, to feel what she needed to feel. He didn't let go of her hand or rush the moment. Some feelings required time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sloane took a deep breath and looked at him, tears still glistening in her eyes. "I never stopped loving you either," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was just scared, and no one protected me." Reed felt his heart race. 8 years of doubts, of unanswered questions, of an emptiness nothing seemed to fill, vanished with those simple, honest words. They looked at each other, really looked, like they hadn't in 8 years. In that moment, they weren't an ex-executive and a single mother struggling to survive. They were just Reed and Sloane, two hearts that, despite all odds, had never stopped beating for each other. The love still existed, and it endured. It had survived time, distance, lies, fears. It had always been there, dormant perhaps, but never truly gone. And now, in that hospital room bathed by the soft glow of evening light, it flourished once more, stronger because it had been tested, more precious because it had nearly been lost. "Turn right here, Mr. Reed," June directed, pointing to a narrow street. Reed followed her direction, driving slowly through a modest neighborhood. Small houses and old buildings lined both sides, many in need of repairs. The girls seemed excited, despite the rundown area. "That's it," Maisie exclaimed, pointing to a small brick building with 3 floors. 2 days remained until Sloane's hospital discharge, and Reed wanted to make sure everything was perfect for her return. The girls were eager to pick up more clothes and show him where they lived. "We live on the 2nd floor," Wren explained as they climbed a narrow staircase with a shaky handrail. The hallway was dimly lit, several bulbs burned out. The apartment doors were old, some with makeshift repairs. The girls stopped at a door marked 2B, and June pulled out a key hidden in a small planter beside it. "Mom keeps it here for emergencies," she explained, handing the key to Reed. Reed felt a pang thinking of the girls coming home alone from school, using a hidden key. Children so young shouldn't have that kind of responsibility. When he opened the door and stepped inside, followed by the triplets, he paused, taking in the sight. The tiny apartment had just 3 rooms, a living area that also served as a kitchen, 1 bedroom, and a bathroom. Reed tried not to show how impacted he was by the reality of the place. The furniture was sparse and worn, a threadbare couch with visible patches, a small table with 3 mismatched chairs, improvised shelves made of boards and bricks. The kitchen consisted of a 2-burner stove, an old fridge that emitted a continuous hum, and a sink with a dripping faucet. "Come see our room," Maisie called, tugging his hand. The bedroom told an even clearer story. 1 double bed took up nearly all the space, obviously where all 4 slept. A tiny wardrobe and a toy chest completed the furnishings. The walls were adorned with colorful drawings taped up, an effort to bring cheer to the stark space. Reed discreetly opened the fridge while the girls searched for toys. As he suspected, it was almost empty. Some eggs, nearly expired milk, wilted vegetables. The kitchen cabinets told the same story. A few packs of pasta, some rice, flour. The pantry of a family living on the edge, counting every penny. Looking more closely, Reed noticed the small details that spoke of effort and love. Curtains sewn from old sheets but carefully stitched. Paper flowers in recycled bottles painted by hand. The place was simple, but every corner showed Sloane's attempts to create a welcoming home, even with very little. "Mr. Reed, look," June called, showing him a shoebox turned into a dollhouse, with furniture made from bottle caps and scraps of fabric. He knelt down, examining the homemade creation with genuine interest. "This is amazing," he said, touched by the creativity that thrived despite hardship. While the triplets gathered their things, Reed made a decision. He pulled out his phone and made several calls, speaking in a low tone. "How about we make a surprise for Mom?" he suggested to the girls. "We can fix the place up nicely for when she comes back." Their eyes lit up at the idea. At the grocery store, Reed filled 2 carts, basic foods and items he knew they rarely had. Fresh fruit, chocolate, ingredients for baking. They bought flowers, new sheets, blankets, and kitchen utensils. "Mom always looks at those flowers when we pass that shop," Wren said shyly, pointing to some lilies. "Let's take them all," Reed smiled, adding them to the cart. Back at the apartment, they began the transformation. The girls helped excitedly, following Reed's instructions, delighted with the surprise. He hired a small crew for bigger tasks, fixing the dripping faucet, replacing burned-out light bulbs, painting the walls in bright, clean colors. The entire afternoon was devoted to cleaning, organizing, and transforming the small apartment. Reed replaced the improvised curtains with new, colorful ones. He swapped out the worn sheets for soft, fresh ones. He stocked the cupboards with food. He placed flowers in new vases. By the time they finished, the apartment was unrecognizable. The newly painted walls made the space brighter. The girls' drawings, once taped to the walls, were now framed and carefully hung. The triplets ran around, exclaiming over every change, every new detail. Reed watched them, his heart full. He knew this was just the beginning, a band-aid over a much bigger wound. But it was a start. Late at night, with the triplets finally asleep in the freshly made double bed with bright sheets and a cozy comforter, Reed stood in the middle of the small living area, looking around. The contrast between what he'd seen hours before and what he saw now was stark. "They won't live like this anymore," he murmured to himself, determination in his voice. "Not while I can change it." 2 days later, Reed was driving slowly with Sloane in the passenger seat and the triplets in the back, practically bouncing with excitement. "Don't tell her anything," Maisie warned every few minutes. "It's a surprise." "I won't say a word," Sloane promised, smiling at her daughters through the rearview mirror. She was still pale and thin from her hospital stay, but her eyes had regained their sparkle. When they arrived at the building, Reed helped Sloane up the stairs slowly. She still felt pain and moved carefully. The girls raced ahead, eager to reveal the surprise. June opened the door with a dramatic flourish, and all three shouted in unison, "Surprise!" Sloane stopped in the doorway, her eyes widening at the transformation. The scent of freshly prepared food, the aroma of fresh flowers, the sight of cozy blankets neatly folded on a refurbished sofa, the newly painted walls, all hit her at once. Her eyes filled with tears as she moved slowly around the apartment, touching everything as if to confirm it was real. "Was this you?" she asked Reed, her voice trembling. He nodded, stepping closer. "Yes. You're not coming back to a place of pain. This is now a home." Sloane let the tears flow freely, gazing around as though seeing the place for the first time. Reed hadn't just brought new things, he had kept what mattered. The girls' framed drawings, their photos on the walls, small objects of sentimental value. He'd honored what was already there, simply making it safer, more comfortable. While the girls pulled Sloane to show her each change, Reed stood back, his heart overflowing. In that moment, he understood that home wasn't just a roof and 4 walls. It was where the heart found peace. 2 weeks passed since Sloane had returned home. Her bruises were gone, her pain lessened, and her eyes had the same brightness Reed remembered from so long ago. That Friday night, Reed prepared a special dinner featuring everyone's favorite dishes: mac and cheese for Maisie, grilled chicken for June, mashed potatoes for Wren, and a colorful salad for Sloane. The table was set with fun folded napkins and small candles in the center. "This is really good," Maisie exclaimed, already on her second helping. "Better than a restaurant," June agreed solemnly. Wren ate quietly, but her clean plate spoke for itself. Occasionally, she glanced at Reed and gave him a shy smile. During dinner, they chatted about the girls' school, the book Reed read them at bedtime, Sloane's progress with physical therapy. It was a simple family scene, but to Reed it felt like a miracle, something he never imagined for himself and now couldn't live without. After dessert, chocolate ice cream that made the girls bounce with excitement, Sloane suggested, "How about you girls plan a talent show while Reed and I do the dishes?" The triplets ran to the bedroom, thrilled by the idea. Reed and Sloane began clearing the table in a comfortable silence. "They're so happy," she said, looking toward the bedroom. "I've never seen them so carefree." Reed felt a surge of affection. "They're amazing, Sloane." You did an incredible job, regardless of everything. When the dishes were done, Reed asked, "It's a beautiful night. Want to take a walk in the yard while they get their show ready?" The tiny communal yard was just a patch of grass with a few benches and a flower bed. But under the orange glow of the setting sun, it had its own modest charm. They sat on a wooden bench, watching the sky change colors. Reed felt his heart pounding. He'd been planning this moment for days. "Sloane," he began, turning to face her, "these last few weeks have been the most meaningful of my life." She smiled. "For me too. Seeing you with the girls, being part of your everyday life. It's like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing." Sloane studied him for a moment. "You've changed, Reed, in a good way. I guess I finally grew up," he replied. Then, gathering his courage, he took her hands in his, gazing into her eyes. "Can we try again? I was so young before. My father was always controlling, but he doesn't control me anymore." He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the understandable fear after all she had been through. "He won't interfere ever again," Reed promised, his voice resolute. Sloane looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Reed. She took a deep breath, like someone preparing to dive into unknown waters. "Yes," she finally said, her voice quiet but sure. "We deserve this chance." Reed pulled Sloane into an embrace, feeling her relax against him, her arms wrapping around him as well. They stood there, hugging in silence under the darkening sky. Now free, choosing each other, willingly and lovingly. No longer manipulated by circumstances or other people, but making their own decision, with open eyes and honest hearts. "Mr. Reed, Mom, the show's about to start," June's voice called from the window. Hand in hand, they walked back to the apartment, where three eager little girls waited to give what would undoubtedly be the most extraordinary talent show the world had ever seen. 4 months later, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, a small group gathered in the garden of Reed's estate. A simple arch decorated with wildflowers marked the spot where he stood, nervous and happy. The music started, and everyone turned around. First came Maisie, scattering petals along the path, then June, carrying the rings on a small pillow, and then Wren, following her sisters with a smile that lit up her whole face. The three wore identical light blue dresses with white ribbons around the waist and small flowers in their hair. They were radiant, fully aware of their important role. Then Sloane appeared, and Reed felt the breath leave his lungs. She wore a simple dress in a deeper shade of blue, her dark hair loose, adorned with the same flowers as the girls. In her hands was a bouquet of lilies, the flowers she'd always admired in shop windows but never bought. The ceremony was brief and meaningful. They exchanged vows about second chances, deliberate choices, and a love that survives time and adversity. The girls stood beside them the entire time, active participants in the union that officially made them a family. When they were pronounced husband and wife, and Reed kissed Sloane amid heartfelt applause, the triplets jumped for joy, hugging them, turning the solemn moment into a spontaneous celebration. The move to Reed's estate happened gradually. First on weekends, then, when the school semester ended, they made the full transition. The house, once impeccably decorated but strangely devoid of life, underwent a complete transformation. Where once there was silence, there was now laughter, conversation, and music. Rooms previously untouched now had purpose and personality. One of Reed's first actions was to formally register Maisie, June Dummars, and Wren as his daughters. The small courthouse ceremony felt as meaningful as the wedding itself, a formal commitment to the three girls who had captured his heart. "Now we're officially a family," he said, hugging them. Each girl got her own room, something they'd never had before. Reed made sure they were involved in every decision. Maisie chose aqua with adventure books, a drawing table, and string lights shaped like stars on the ceiling. June picked a soft lavender with shelves for her collections, a reading chair, and bright pillows. Wren, the dreamiest, wanted a pale yellow with bird mobiles, a wide window overlooking the garden, and a bookshelf of nature books. The living room became the heart of the house. The once pristine leather sofa was replaced by a large, cozy one, perfect for family movie nights. The tables now held games, drawings and storybooks. Green, flowering plants filled the corners. A wedding photo of the five of them smiling hung prominently on the main wall. Next to it were photos of the girls at various moments. At the park, the beach, playing in the yard. A new story was unfolding. The mansion, once a symbol of status, was now simply home. A place where children ran barefoot, where dinners came with animated chatter, where small daily victories were met with enthusiasm. One evening, Reed found Sloane on the veranda, watching the triplets play in the garden. He hugged her from behind, both of them quietly absorbing the scene. "Look at them," Sloane whispered. "So happy, so safe, as if it's always been like this." "And it always will be," Reed promised. The house now breathed joy, permanence, and affection. Rooms that once felt like museum displays became living spaces, each with its own identity. Hallways once silent now echoed with running feet and laughter. In the study, Reed one day found Maisie drawing, thoroughly focused. "What are you making?" he asked. She held up the paper, showing 5 stick figures under a big house. "It's us," she explained. "Our family." Reed felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the simple but deeply meaningful drawing. Another time, he found June teaching Ren to tie her shoelaces. "This way you can run faster at the park," she explained with the wisdom of a 6-year-old. Each day brought moments like that. Small discoveries, little joys, tiny challenges overcome together. The life they were building wasn't perfect, but it was genuine. It had ups and downs, arguments and makeups, tears and laughter. It was real. The decision they had made in that small yard was blossoming into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have imagined. The love that had survived 8 years of separation, lies, and manipulation was now taking root. A new family was born, not by chance, but by choice, choosing to see beyond the obvious, to open their hearts to unexpected possibilities, and to love without reservations, choosing to start over. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.